Lady the First Engine. Story 4. Breaking Bad. One of the box tanks that arrived on the railway was named Walter. He looked exactly the same as Neil, however he carried a small tender for his coal. Unfortunately, this tiny tender was enough to inflate his huge ego. A new harbour and station were being built. The station was grand, with 2 platforms and a big glass canopy. Mr. Stone and Mr. Boomer looked on at their new station with wonder. This truly was the most impressive structure on the railway. "What do you think of me hard work, sirs?" said a voice, interrupting their trance. Mr. Stone and Mr. Boomer turned to see Walter wearing a rather smug face. "Don't get me wrong, the workmen helped too, but I was the one who brought all the materials." "Thank you, Walter," smiled Mr. Stone, trying to make the engine feel better. "Oh, of course, sir. It's my pleasure to do my duty for this railway. Without me, this line would grind to a halt." And he kept on talking and talking and talking. I think we should move on. The harbour was nowhere near as impressive. It was only a few sidings, sitting atop a stone dock. The stone was mined from a nearby quarry, and workhorses would bring it, as well as other goods, down to Kelsthorpe, where Neil would then take it down to the harbour, for the men to continue their construction. Neil had to work hard with the stone trucks. He puffed backwards and forwards all day. Mr. Stone made sure he never pulled a long train. Neil, however, found it most frustrating, having to make constant trips, and would always return to the sheds exhausted. "Huh, dear old dear Neil," Walter chuckled one evening. "Afraid of a bit of hard work, are we?" "It's not that," Neil explained. "I'm just exhausted from having to make so many trips. I'm rushed off my wheels." "Ha! Sounds like you're afraid of hard work. Why, with my tender, I could run circles around you." Lady gave Walter a look, one which seemed to say something along the lines of, "Stop talking," and Walter quickly hushed. Neil gave Lady a smile. "Thanks, but it's no bother. It'll get tired soon." The next morning the engines all rolled out of their shed, ready to start another day. But to their surprise, sitting in the yards was something none of them had ever seen before. It looked like a wooden shed, but it had wheels on it. Mr. Stone, who was admiring the strange wagon, turned to face his engines. "This," he began, "is a brake van." "A what van?" asked Walter. "A brake van. It's a special van that goes at the end of trains. It gives somewhere for the guard to sit, and more efficient braking power. And if any of the trucks were to try and break away, the van could easily bring them to a stop." "Oh, that all sounds well and good," Walter mused, trying to hide how impressed he was. "But why do we need one? We be running the line fine for years, with no help from these breaking vans." "Lots of railways on the mainland use them, Walter," grinned Mr. Stone. "We never needed one because our trains were always short, and stable boys could easily be called to stop any breakaways. However, our trains have been getting heavier recently, and with the railway constantly expanding, I thought it best to get one. There's only so much those stable boys can do after all. If it performs well, more will be on the way. Neil, with the brake van, you'll be able to haul longer trains than ever before. That'll save you from travelling so much." Neil was relieved. "Oh, thank you, sir," he smiled. Neil soon arranged a train of empty wagons. He chortled as he shunted a line of 12 trucks, adding the brake van to the end. A longer train," he puffed to himself. He enjoyed his day mostly. His trains were heavier, but his trips were far less frequent. Neil grew very fond of the brake van. Walter, on the other hand, was not pleased. "That new brake van's made you lazy, taking all these longer trains, just so you can have a few extra winks. You're getting soft, brother." Neil rolled his eyes. Lady was fully prepared to give Walter another stare, but Neil gestured for her to stop. He then smiled. If there was one thing Neil knew how to do, it was how to play with others, and he could read his younger brother's mind like a book. "Yeah, you're right, Walter," he replied, an impish grin growing on his face. "I suppose I am losing my touch." Walter was taken aback. Well, he stuttered. "Admitting you have a problem is the first step." "Aye, I just can't help myself," Neil sighed dramatically. "The brake van's so enticing. She has a coupling hooks in me, man. Isn't it my fault? I don't have a big strong tender like you. I'm hooked to the brake van, I tell you. Hooked!" Walter's face softened, one to genuine concern. Whoa, don't go beating yourself up now, Neil. If you want it, I could take your train for the next few days. Give you a break from all that stress, as well as the brake van. Oh, Neil said, feigning innocence. Would you really do that for me? Of course, Neil, it's no trouble, Walter boomed valiantly. Tomorrow I only have a few goods trains and a passenger train in the afternoon. Nice easy work for you. Not that my work is normally easy, of course, he finished hastily. Oh, thank you, brother, Neil smiled. I'm glad to have you on my side. It's no trouble. Don't worry. I'll make you proud tomorrow. Now, I wish you a good night. And with that, he went to sleep. Neil turned to Lady with a sly grin. Lady was gobsmacked. Walter was as good as his word. He woke up bright and early to take care of Neil's trains. He shunted a line of only 7 trucks together. He looked over at the brake van, sitting alone on her siding. I'll show you. The brake van looked around. She had no clue what he was going on about. Walter soon got to work. He met the horses at Kelsthorpe, then brought the stone and lumber down for the workmen. He soon grew bored and tired of going up and down all day. He didn't want to admit it, but he could see why Neil had taken to the brake van so much. But he was too stubborn and prideful to even think about taking it. He returned to the shed so tired, he fell asleep almost immediately. By the time the next morning rolled around, Walter quickly knew he needed to change tact. Then it hit him. Why am I taking the same amount Neil used to? He exclaimed to himself. I've got a tender. I can pull far more and go much further than he can, with no brake van to worry about. Making the job easier. Isn't that what you accused Neil of doing? His driver teased. Walter snorted. It's completely different. Unlike him, I have pure strength. And he hurried off, fetching a grand total of 14 trucks. He bumped and banged them together and headed off. Once the building materials were collected, Walter coasted happily down the line, which ran mostly downhill to meet the ocean. Silly old Neil, this is easy, this is easy. The trucks meanwhile sulked and grumbled behind him. This silly engine thinks he can bump and bash us about, said one. Then he has the right to insult Neil, cried another. Don't worry, lads, smiled the middle truck. I have a plan. And she jerked at the old coupling. With Walter bumping her about that morning, it was practically useless. A metal clunk soon rang out as the coupling finally broke, and the gap between the train began to widen. What was that? Asked Walter. He felt the jerk and heard the sound. His driver noticed it too and looked back. Glory! He shouted. Faster, Walter, faster! The last 7 trucks had broken away and were now chasing after them. Walter tried to steam away as fast as his wheels could carry him, but the trucks were quickly gaining. Oh, this is a disaster, Walter moaned. How could this happen to me? They rocketed round bends and rumbled through Rolf's castle. They soon reached Kirk Ronan. What's going to happen when we reach the station? Cried Walter. Let's just hope the points are set towards the harbour, gritted the driver. Closer and closer they came, before they swerved sharply to the right, heading down into the harbour. The station was safe from harm. But Walter wasn't. We're going to crash into the sea at this rate, he yelled. Finally the trucks caught up with a shuddering jar, and pushed Walter on and on further into the harbour. Walter applied his brakes, but it was no good. Workman leapt out of his way for dear life as he dashed through the yard entrance and onto the quay. The end of the docks were growing closer and closer. Any minute Walter would crash into the ocean. His driver had one last trick, and he threw Walter into reverse. The engine was frantic. I must stop, he yelled, closing his eyes. He felt a bump and a lurch, and then nothing. Walter opened his eyes, only to see the sea lapping angrily against the quay. He'd broken through the buffers, but mercifully he hadn't fallen in. Walter breathed a sigh of relief. Soon Neil arrived to help re-rail his stricken brother. Behind him was the brake van, and stepping out of it was Mr. Stone and Mr. Boomer. Mr. Boomer was furious at the chaos that lay before him, and soon began barking orders at the workmen to re-rail his engine. Mr. Stone, meanwhile, was completely silent. He walked over to Walter and stared at him gravely. Walter gulped. Somehow him not blowing up like Mr. Boomer was far more scary. Well, Walter, he began, I hope you now understand the importance of brake vans. Sorry, sir, Walter spluttered. We'll discuss your punishment for your foolish behaviour later, but for now I hope going forwards you will be more careful and follow my rules. Ugh, aye, sir, Walter sighed sadly. Later that evening, the trucks were all in the yards, discussing the day's events. "That was exhilarating!" cried one. "Who would have thought that defying basic safety, common sense, and almost having a brush with death could be so fun?" cheered another. "It's not fair," complained one.
Yeah, we weren't there,"
barked another.
"I want to brush death too, yeah."
"Everyone," smiled the truck who had been in the middle of Walter's train. Her buffers were smashed and her coupling was gone, but she didn't seem to care. "What we did today shows that those steam engines aren't as in charge as they think they are. Under the right circumstances, turns out their fate is in our buffers." "Yeah, like the ones you don't have," heckled yet another truck. A few giggles rang out in the crowd, but the troublesome truck continued. "I suggest we lay low for a while. Wait for another opportunity to strike. Then we'll show those puffers who's really in charge," she giggled. The other trucks all cackled at this. They had had their first taste of trickery, and they certainly weren't going to stop here.